This is On Assignment.
VOA News.
Hi everyone, this is On Assignment, your backstage pass to the Voice of America. I'm Imran Siddiqui.
And I'm Alex Villarreal. In today's show, a sex scandal rocks the U.S. spy agency. Why does it matter? Senior correspondent Andre Dineshna is here with us to explain.
Also today, President Obama wins 4 more years in the White House. What was the impact of religious voters on the election?
And later, how one of California's favorite water sports is uniting fun and faith.
And for the stories behind the stories, let's go on assignment. We begin with the scandal at the Central Intelligence Agency. David Petraeus, the retired U.S. general, credited with turning around the Iraq War, resigned last week as the agency's chief. His reason, an extramarital affair.
It was soon found out that an FBI investigation uncovered the affair. The investigation involved not just one, but 2 women. Petraeus biographer Paula Broadwell, the identified mistress, and Petraeus family friend Jill Kelly. It was Kelly who sought out the help of the FBI after receiving harassing emails from Broadwell.
Andre, this is like real-life soap opera.
All right.
But should anyone care? I mean, he resigned because of this.
Well, you have to put it in context, and I think the key thing is that he was head of the Central Intelligence Agency. And within the within the intelligence community, you have to make absolutely clear that you can't do anything that can make you a target of blackmail. And so it was a question of honor for him, first of all, because of the military background, and also because of this ethos within the intelligence community that if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. In other words, if I have to make sure that my agents don't put themselves in areas where they can be blackmailed, then it's the same thing.
So it's like he could have divorced his wife, married the woman, then it would be okay.
If he divorced, there isn't any issue because it's legal and everything else. So it's the key thing about having an affair outside of the normal bounds, if you want, and you can then become a target.
And what about the possibility for security breaches, possible classified information getting out to the woman or women involved?
That's one of the things that the FBI was looking into, and the initial investigation proved that no, there was no security breach. So from that standpoint, he's fine, and you would expect the head of the Central Intelligence Agency not to be involved in.
Right.
But it still brings to the fore the whole issue of an extramarital affair.
Yeah, but why did it take so long? I mean, people were just sleeping on this. They knew that something was going on, and now everyone's talking about this extramarital affair.
Well, we know about it because Petraeus went and offered his resignation to the president, and the president accepted it. Then, backtracking, good journalistic work, one finds out who is the mistress, who is the wife, etc.
And how it all unfolded.
Right, and you're slowly but surely getting more and more information, literally as the hours go by.
And putting this into a broader context, this issue of officials and infidelity worldwide, this really is nothing new. And we saw a tweet, it was kind of a tongue-in-cheek tweet from someone pointing out that, Petraeus lost his job after one affair, but the Chinese deputy railway minister had 18 mistresses before he was sacked.
That must be a world record.
Yeah, right.
That's probably a world record.
So why is it important here?
Well, I think it's important because also you have to look at our Victorian past, and that is when it has to do with sex and sexual issues. We're a little bit not afraid, but kind of dicey. Just to give you an example, in Europe, for example, I mean, when François Mitterrand, the French president, passed away in 1996, at his funeral was his wife and his son, and a little bit in the background, his mistress and his daughter.
Wow.
They were there at the funeral.
That's something.
So from the standpoint of Europe,
yeah,
it's not that big a deal.
But if it's a shame for the CIA, we'll wait and see what happens.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, thank you again, Andre. We will definitely be following this closely as more details emerge. Our VOA senior correspondent, Andre Dineshna, reporting for us here in Washington. It's time now for a break, but coming up, we'll look at the role of religious voters in this year's U.S. presidential election. You're watching On Assignment.
The 2012 U.S. presidential election is now one for the history books. A look back at the campaign shows religious values taking a backseat to economic concerns, as neither party really focused on faith.
But that doesn't mean that religion wasn't important to the race. Researchers say young voters, including young religious voters, were key to re-electing President Obama. On Assignment's Rebecca Ward talked with VOA's Jerome Sokolovsky about his report on the role of U.S. religious voters.
At the Public Religion Research Institute, Dan Cox studies the role that faith played for the electorate at large.
Although it was definitely played a secondary role, or we might even say a supporting role to the economy and jobs, it was definitely important, I think if we look at it more of a chapter in a larger story that's unfolding. And what I mean here is like the dramatically changing religious landscape.
This morning, in the name of Jesus Christ,
religious conservatives were decisive in past Republican victories and are still an important part of the party's base. But 1 in 5 Americans, according to a recent poll, do not identify with a specific religion, and this group is predominantly young. While many are still deeply spiritual, they lean toward the Democratic Party and tend to be socially liberal, says Cox.
Although they still don't turn out as in high numbers as other groups, so they're only about 12% of voters in 2012. But they are making a difference.
Cox says they were crucial in passing ballot measures in several states that favored legalization of marijuana and same-sex marriage.
The story really is one of religion and sort of religion and politics being less and less important in American elections. And in this election, what we saw is a lot of voters, a lot of young voters, who were turned off by that kind of mix of religion and politics, and actually did not vote in favor of candidates who had very kind of conservative religious views on women, on abortion. So what we saw in this election also were 3 landmark ballot initiatives, all supporting the legalization of same-sex marriage. And we saw 2 candidates who had come out with very strong anti-abortion statements who were actually not voted into office.
And that's kind of interesting because the Republicans sometimes lean on the evangelical vote, and these would be issues that they would be interested in. Yet those referendums and those candidates didn't necessarily bring out that vote.
Right. In the past, what we've seen is the evangelical vote being very important for Republican candidates. Decisive in the case of George Bush, the second George Bush, and also helping Ronald Reagan in the last century.
And you told me something interesting. There are 2 firsts, or 2, I would say, religious firsts for Congress.
Right. I mean, what's coming out is a very kind of plural, multicultural America here, and we have 2 firsts, both from Hawaii, of the first Hindu Congresswoman, or first Hindu representative in Congress, and we also have the first Buddhist elected to the U.S. Senate from Hawaii as well.
That's interesting. This election, I mean, obviously, Mitt Romney, since the founder Joseph Smith, which I just learned from reading your report, is the first Mormon to run for president since 18-something. And so what did it mean for Mormonism, if anything?
Right. Yeah, I don't think this election is really about how much does the Mormon vote count, because yes, most of them did vote for Mitt Romney, as one would expect. I think what's interesting to come out of this election is that even though Mitt Romney lost, Mormonism in a way won. It's marked their acceptance into American society. Americans now are not as quick to think that, oh, their beliefs are so weird or they're nutcases. They really are Americans. People are finally realizing that, seeing that, and embracing them. And Mormons are less defensive about who they are and what they believe as well.
And our thanks to Jerome Sokolovsky, who covers religion for VOA here in Washington.
We'll take a short break now. Still to come, how some women entrepreneurs are starting businesses in a still struggling economy. You're watching On Assignment. Almost 1/3 of American small businesses are owned by women, and that number is on the rise, especially in fields that were once considered male-only territory.
And in the current tough economic environment, more women have been inspired to strike out on their own. Some women-owned businesses are doing very well, including one Virginia-based moving company that VOA's Julie Tabo visited. Let's take a look.
A few decades ago, this truck would likely have belonged to a company owned by a man, but it actually belongs to Barbara Ayers. She is president and CEO of Apple Transfer, based in Fredericksburg, Virginia, which helps move households and businesses all across the United States and overseas. Ayers started the company with her brother in 1988.
We started out, it was just my brother and me. We had one small truck. He actually did the moving, and I took care of the office.
Today, she oversees a fleet of trucks and a large storage facility and employs up to 100 people during peak moving season.
So, Julie, why are we seeing so many more women starting their own businesses?
Well, that's a good question. Back in the 1970s, it all started with legislation. An act was passed where women could actually sign for a loan without a male co-signer. So that kind of set the foundation. But then since then, of course, a lot more women have entered the workforce, and these women have been working mostly because they needed to, for economic reasons, but also there was a part of it that women just wanted to have more fulfillment. They were getting more educated, they were entering the fields that they've always wanted to be in, and so there was a lot more women getting into the workforce. And after a while, a lot of the women kind of hit that glass ceiling, that proverbial glass ceiling where they just felt they weren't going as far as they wanted, maybe they weren't being as creative as they wanted, and also the fact that economically they were not maybe getting as compensated for the same amount of work as men were. So there was also another issue of balancing work and family. You know, a lot of women, of course, you know, have children, and they were trying to balance the demands of raising a family with the demands of being a professional woman. And they found that maybe, especially years ago, there was not as much flexibility in the workforce for women to be able to balance the two.
When we talk about a small business, how small is small?
A lot of it depends on what kind of business you have. So the numbers do change, but for the purposes of what we're talking about, 500 employees or less does define you as a small business. And to be women-owned, you have to be 51% owner. So for purposes of, say, the barbers of the world who have a moving company, or let's say someone has a small construction company, as long as you're under 500 employee, have less than 500 employees, that defines you as a small business.
And so what's interesting is that we've seen women in these traditional businesses that people would think women would be involved in, but then we've also seen them entering into businesses and areas, industries that are traditionally male-dominated.
Exactly. I mean, we normally think about women business owners as having a little flower shop down the road or a little cookie business. But yes, more and more women are entering into fields that were normally dominated by men, and that includes everything from construction, IT, and more green technology.
And it really does defy expectations, though, this woman, as you mentioned, who's so elegant, and yet she owns a bunch of trucks.
Exactly. And more women. And she has like-minded colleagues and friends who are entering into these fields. So yes, more and more women getting into these male-dominated areas and just loving it and feeling like there really are no barriers. If you were to ask me what areas, you know, are not open to them, and I'm sure it could be argued that there are some that, you know, maybe just the physical strength or the nature of certain types of businesses, but for the most part, it isn't so much a question of, you know, why, it's why not. Anna Harvey of the U.S. Small Business Administration says women-owned businesses in the U.S. are flourishing.
If you think about 1979, only 5% of the privately owned businesses in this country were owned by women. So we are now here in 2000, almost 13, and 30% of the privately owned businesses are owned by women.
Now, talking about the idea that there are no barriers, you still have, women have come a long way in this country. You have a lot more gender equality in the workplace, but there are still some difficulties that exist, some challenges. You have women earning 77 cents to the dollar that every man earns for the same work. So what are some of the challenges that women who own businesses, who own workplaces face?
Well, when I talked to Barbara about this, she said that one of the main problems was people associated, for example, a moving company with men. And so when she was trying to conduct her business and expand her business, she did come across a sort of old way of thinking among these older men who in the beginning were a little bit reluctant to maybe, want to do business with her or
skeptical,
to be supportive.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But she says, honestly, if you have a good product and you do a good job and you have good word of mouth, over time people just start to accept you based on your track record, and people not thinking twice about a woman answering the phone and saying, I'm the CEO of this construction company or this cement factory.
And of course, we'd like to thank Julie Tabo, who covers women's stories and more here at VOA. Our next story takes us to California for a recent interfaith worship service on a beach south of Los Angeles. Christians, Muslims, Jews, and others came together to celebrate faith and California's surfing culture.
And at the Surf City, not only were there 2 girls for every boy, this is just a joke, it's an old song by Jan and Dean. Even Dean Torrance of Jan and Dean was there at Surf City.
And Imran connected with VOA's Mike O'Sullivan in our Los Angeles bureau to get the backstory. Let's take a look.
Mike, tell us a little bit about this event, Blessings of the Waves, that you covered at Huntington Beach. What was this about?
Well, this is something that happens every year, and it's been going on for about 5 years, and it's an interfaith, interdenominational event that brings out people of various religious traditions and no religious tradition at all, people who just come out for the experience, and they just really celebrate the setting. Each morning at Huntington Beach, which calls itself Surf City, the surfers are out early to catch the waves. Once a year, an interfaith service called the Blessing of the Waves draws surfers and others to talk about their love of the ocean. A Muslim leads an Islamic prayer. A synagogue member blows the Jewish ram's horn called the shofar. Zoroastrian monarch Bourgeois reads a prayer in the ancient Avestan language.
So we have actually prayers for all the major elements of nature, including the water.
California is one of the most diverse states in the country. I mean, we have people here from, I'm sure, every country on earth and every faith tradition around the globe. And I think this is probably a distinctively American kind of thing, and maybe a distinctively California kind of thing when you get some of the long-haired surfers out there in a religious service wearing their swimming suits and holding their surfboards. I could imagine a few other places where it could happen, Australia maybe, but it's pretty distinctively American, and I think probably distinctively Californian. A choir of immigrants from the island nation of Tonga provides music. 2 Roman Catholic priests also presided over the service. There is much to be thankful for, says Dean Torrance, who was half of the 1960s pop duo Jan and Dean. They helped to popularize surf music with songs like Surf City.
The sand, the ocean, the blue sky, the weather. I mean, what could be better? I'm very, very, very blessed to be here in a place that we call Surf City.
Those who gathered here say, for those of any faith, this beachfront setting is inspirational. Most religious events happen indoors here, and it is a shame because when you come out of the church or the mosque or the synagogue and you look around, you've just got this blue sky and the palm trees and the greenery, and it's just gorgeous. And you think, why can't we just do this outside? And this is what some of these religious groups came together in Huntington Beach and said, let's just, at least once a year, we'll do this outside in one of the most gorgeous settings anywhere in the state, here on the beach, and we'll celebrate the sea and the surf and the environment.
And lastly, do you think the organizers of this event achieved what they set out to achieve?
Well, I think so. I mean, they brought together a very diverse group. I mean, everybody there just enjoyed it. And we had an interesting cast of characters. An 87-year-old Catholic priest, Father Christian Mondor, who is a veteran surfer and a nice guy, and just loved by the people in the community, people of all faiths. And it was just a great day.
And our thanks to VOA's Michael Sullivan in Los Angeles for taking us to the beach for that story.
We go now from the beach in California to a basketball court in Turkey. Turkey's largest Kurdish city has been at the center of a long conflict between the state and Kurdish rebels fighting for autonomy.
The city often sees clashes between young people and security forces, but one man has devoted his life to bringing hope and a way out of violence through basketball. Dorian Jones has a story.
Diyarbakır's Bala basketball team winning again. The team has built a formidable reputation against the better-funded teams in Western Turkey. The architect of the team is coach Gökhan Yildirim. Yildirim's 20-year basketball odyssey started in a schoolyard as a 19-year-old student.
The children didn't have a clue about basketball. They didn't even know what a basketball looked like. And when we asked them to bring a basketball, they would bring a volleyball. We always had to say, bring the orange ball.
The Bala quarter of Diyarbakır, where the basketball team is based, was born out of the conflict between Turkish security forces and Kurdish rebels, the PKK. Many of the families living there were forced to flee their villages because of the fighting. Bala is synonymous with clashes with the security forces, often involving children and youths. But Yildirim is working hard to build a new reputation for Bala. His basketball team now has a practice court thanks to the local municipality, which devoted its meager resources to support it. Yildirim says basketball can offer an alternative to confrontation.
The situation here pushes young children to be fighters. They think they can solve their problems by fighting. I'm trying to counter this by showing them love, telling them this team is their home, here we protect you, and that each and every one of them is important.
Yildirim coaches 6 teams and his colleague works with 5 girls' teams, which are equally successful. Success does not come easily. Yildirim devotes about 6 hours a day coaching after finishing work as a teacher. But Captain Ali Alachar says he is much appreciated.
His efforts here in Baglar Diyarbakır, even in general in the southeast, are immeasurable, inspiring the children, providing education, and proving that life is not only about money or sports or education, but doing all of them together.
For a few players, Bala has been a stepping stone to professional clubs, while another player won a US school basketball scholarship. For Yildirim, winning is important.
When we lose, I can't get out of bed. I don't like losing. It's a terrible thing. I get so angry that sometimes I feel my heart will stop.
But Bala's trophy room is a testament to his success. A success Gökhan Yildirim is hoping will help carve out a new reputation in Turkey for Bala youths, other than one of violence. Dorian Jones for VOA News, Diyarbakır, Southeast Turkey.
All right, everybody, with that, it's time for us to say goodbye. But don't worry, we'll be back again next week with a look at the Afghan army as international forces prepare to leave the country.
And we'll also tell you about elephant protection efforts in Africa.
To rewatch any of what you just saw, or in case you missed anything, you can find this week's episode and its segments at voanews.com, on YouTube and Facebook.
On behalf of everyone here in Washington Studios, thank you so much for joining us. Catch you next week. This was On Assignment.